Welcome to the Higher Power Podcast, presented by Higher Power Sports PT, the show dedicated to helping active individuals like you unlock your full potential through expert insights on injury prevention, performance enhancement, and recovery. Kurt Kessler is a board-certified specialist in sports physical therapy and an athletic trainer. In each episode, he and his guests bring you the latest evidence-based strategies to help you move better, feel stronger, and stay injury-free. Let's learn together.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Higher Powered Podcast. Today, we're going to jump into one of the most common physical issues that we face, and that is low back pain. Now, like I said, low back pain is one of the most prevalent orthopedic ailments that we face. 80% of people will experience low back pain at some point in their lifetime. I'm not going to dive too far into statistics and generalities in this episode, but in an upcoming episode, I will discuss medical imaging and especially how that relates to low back pain. Instead, what I'm going to talk about is my own experience with low back pain, as this has been fairly recent and ongoing as of the time of this recording. I'll tell you how it happened and what I'm doing to work through it. So living in Lancaster County here this summer, we had a stretch of maybe 2.5, 3 weeks where we just continually got these intense thunderstorms and never had time to let it dry up in between storms. We bought our first house, the house that we're in, and the house that we're moving out of here shortly, in 2019. And that summer, we learned that there was a lot of work to be done in terms of waterproofing our house. It was within the first couple weeks that we had moved in, we got this big storm and water just started gushing through our basement windows. And I remember just standing there watching it come in, feeling absolutely helpless. And ended up not being too bad, but we knew that we had to do something about it. So we had this construction group come out and give us some options and recommendations. And basically what they ended up doing was they dug down in our window wells about 2 feet so that the water had a place to drain down the side of the foundation of the house instead of piling up at the back window. We had that back window replaced because it was rotted out, and we also rerouted our gutter system so that all the water would carry out to the front of the house, and we had a long gutter extender to take it far from the house and dump it down towards the end of the front yard and into the street. We didn't have any issues with water since then. Then this stretch happened this summer, and we got these crazy rains and water started building up and just slightly leaking through the back window. So what I did was I went and grabbed our shop vac. It's a 16-gallon shop vac, and I plugged it in, and from the outside, I would suck the water out of the window well, and then when it would fill up, I would carry the bucket down the driveway and dump it so that it was away from the house. During the first storm, there were 3 or 4 separate flash flood storms that happened throughout the day. And so throughout the course of the day, I made over 50 trips from our back window well area down the driveway to dump water. And I was so irritated because we hadn't had this issue for years. And then when our house is on the market, all this stuff starts to happen. So I'm out there trying to protect our house Under Armour style, both for ourselves and for the resale value and for whoever was going to buy the house. By the end of this day, my lower back was on fire. But it was one of those things where you wake up the next morning and it's a little bit sore, no big deal, and then it goes away. But like I said, these storms kept coming over the course of these 2.5 weeks or so. And we were out of town at my parents' house, which is like an hour and a half away. And my wife's parents knew that we had been fighting some water with these recent storms. And so they went over to the house to check on it. Well, what ended up happening was we ended up getting 7 inches of rain in less than 5 hours. There's a bridge right across the street from our house that goes over a dry ditch, and that bridge had damage. The sidewalk was cracked and wrinkled up. Our whole town was flooded. We had people that had 5 feet of water in their basement. Another house that was 2 roads down from us had their basement cave in. It was national news. It was crazy. All the towns around us got maybe 2 to 3 inches of rain in that storm, and we ended up getting 7. So again, in comparison to the people that had their basement cave in and people that had their entire basements flooded, really, really not too bad at all. We had to replace 1 carpet tile and redirect a little bit of water to our sump pump. But when I got home, me and my best friend, Mr. Shopvac, were back at it again. And I only took 4 loads of water to dump from the window well. But just a few minutes after I finished, my back really, really hurt. And in a much more intense way than it had before. It wasn't just a soreness. This was like actual back pain. And I've had back soreness and back discomfort in the past, but this was a lot different. Anytime I bent forward, I would get this sharp pain that took my breath away. Anytime I would try to straighten up or extend, I would get this grabbing pain in the middle of my back. I couldn't twist. Pretty much all the ways I would move, it would hurt. Turning over in bed was like extremely painful. Being a physical therapist to this point, low back is one of my least favorite things to treat, though I have become much more comfortable with it over the past year. But I at least knew what to do to get started. The repetitive nature of bending over to suck up the water or crouching forward to get low and being in those positions for a long time, combined with having to lift and carry 150-pound buckets of water, really created this, what we call discogenic back pain. Typically with discogenic back pain, you have more symptoms in position where you are either bent over or sitting, basically when your low back is flexed forward. I knew that the remedy for this was to do repeated extension movements, so I did my press-ups throughout the day for the course of a couple days, and the back pain would get less and less intense. So then the question always becomes, if you have someone who responds really well to extension-based movements, then when is it appropriate to start to reintroduce flexion-based movements? So I responded well to extension and slowly started to incorporate flexion or bending forward just as I could tolerate. And then slowly these types of movements started to feel better. I'm not 100% out of the woods yet. As of this recording, I would say I'm like 98% out of pain, and that was, through the course of about 4 weeks. I may have been able to speed that up if I was a little bit more diligent with, working through it. But there are a couple things that I want people to know and learn through this. First, if we go back to the circumstances surrounding the onset of the low back pain, we know that the system as a whole has a certain capacity for stress, whether that's internal stress, as I was feeling, trying to rush home from my parents' house to see what the situation of our house was like, the stress that had been higher for a few weeks because of selling the house and getting the house ready, natural everyday stress from trying to run a business and having 2 kids under 4 years old at home. So my stress levels were really high during that. Plus, you add the external stress in the form of either exercise or, in this case, the physical demand of repetitively removing these buckets of water over the course of a couple weeks, and then the spike in loading or spike in activity. I'm typically not lifting or carrying 150 pounds regularly, but that spike in activity that happened out of necessity in these situations is something that the system does not really like. I've talked on other podcasts about the gradual increase in activity based on whatever your training goal is. Sometimes life happens and you have to react and not have proper training. So stress levels exceeding my stress capacity, spike in workload, repetitive motions or positions in bending forward, and you get this really good recipe for low back pain. So those are the factors that go into my situation. You can take those same factors and apply them to athletes, people working on their fitness in the gym who make progressions with weight or reps or overall workload, and then you get this recipe for injury. There was another realization that I had during this whole episode, and it equates really well with low back pain. So the first time we got a little bit of water in the basement during the storms, I told you I was sucking water out of the window well. The next time it stormed, I thought, if I get out there and start sucking up the water before it gets to the window well, then we definitely won't get anything in the basement. So I'm out there. I noticed this pattern of different spots in the yard that would start forming puddles, and as it would progress, eventually it would lead to water collecting in the window well. So then the next storm, water is not even close to the window well, but these puddles are starting to form on the side of the house, and I'm out there sucking up these puddles so that It doesn't get to the next step so that it doesn't get to the window well. After that, and every time it rained, I'm outside shop vacuuming up little puddles of water accumulating on the side of our house. My wife starts thinking I've gone off the deep end. All I do is check the forecast. When is it going to rain? How much is it going to rain? All I talked about was the weather and the water. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be featured on an upcoming Geico commercial about turning into your parents. Not that my parents do that, but you get the idea. And then it hit me. This is like the perfect analogy for our nervous system. What happens when your brain senses pain or danger or discomfort? What happens then is our nervous system becomes more sensitive to certain movements and produces a pain response. It's not always because there's something damaged or because something is torn. A lot of times we see this more with low back pain. The nervous system can become really, really sensitive to certain movements. So when someone goes to move into some of these movements, their nervous system will create a painful response because it's afraid to go into that motion because of past pain or past experiences. It is a survival mechanism that has been developed in us since we were cavemen. But what we also know now is that pain does not always equate to something structural being wrong or severely injured or any of that. Our nervous system can just be in a heightened sense of sensation or awareness or preparation to try to protect us from doing a movement that it perceives as painful. So the more sensitive I became to the rain, the sooner I would activate my shop vac sucking maneuver to the point where I was sucking up water when there was no threat of it actually getting in our basement. So I make this analogy to say that reintroducing these movements that are or once were painful during my episode of low back pain just has to be done in a way that is not threatening to the nervous system. So if I go in full out, touch my toes, and go into like a full bend time after time, the nervous system is just going to be so heightened and sensitive to that movement that is going to produce a pain response. Instead, what I needed to do and what I was doing at the time when my symptoms were heightened is consistently working into low levels of pain with that movement to desensitize the nervous system to let it know that this movement really isn't dangerous. It isn't scary. It isn't time to set off the alarm bells, and over time, the nervous system will adapt and will no longer be sensitive to that movement. I have the luxury of being a physical therapist, and I have learned more and more over the past year about how to reintegrate movements for people who have low back pain or even chronic pain conditions. But how this typically plays out in the general public for people who don't have this training or are not physical therapists: one, they will experience this onset of pain, not know how to move so that the pain can lessen, and two, definitely don't have the knowledge of how to reintegrate movements in a safe manner. So what ends up happening is these people stay in pain for several weeks. Eventually they probably go to the doctor and maybe physical therapy, but others who don't, well then they just have their bodies adapt to avoid certain movements, and you end up getting stiff in some areas, or if you're not getting movement out of one area, you're going to have to get it from another, and it just changes the way that we move over time and changes our movement patterns. It changes our strength balance and just manifests as this cycle of altered movement and pain sensation. And then it becomes subacute and chronic pain that isn't dealt with properly. And then, by the time they show up in physical therapy, most times this has been going on for years and years, and it takes quite a while to undo some of it. So the big take-home message here today is, number one, learning about the factors that contribute to injury. That is stress levels with internal and external stress, spike in workload, repetitive movements, especially when they have not been trained for. The second thing is there doesn't need to be a fear of movement or even a fear of pain when it comes to the low back or even other body parts to some extent. But what I would encourage you, the listener, to do if you find yourself in this situation, whether with low back or chronic pain or otherwise, you do not have to let it be a life sentence. If you find yourself in this situation, find a therapist that you know, like, and trust, and get it taken care of early so that it does not become something that becomes a long-term issue. And if you're someone who has been in pain for a long time, just know that there are professionals out here that can help you establish appropriate exercise guidelines to either, one, help desensitize your movement so that it is no longer painful, or two, teach you how to become stronger and more functional while dealing with the same level of pain. There's a PT out there who I have been very fortunate to learn from. His name is Tyler Kalasi. He is incredible with programming exercises for those who have been in chronic pain. He's got a bajillion Instagram followers, and he does a lot of fitness and pain education on his Instagram. I would recommend following him if anything in this episode interested you. He said something once that has stuck with me ever since. He said, you can have someone that is constantly in 5 out of 10 pain, has trouble getting up off their couch, getting dressed, making meals, and you can take that same person and have them over time build up doing squats with 150 or 200 pounds or whatever it may be and still experience that 5 out of 10 pain. Some people would perceive that as not making any progress because their pain hasn't changed. But which person would you rather be? The person that has pain and can barely get up off the couch, or a person that has pain and can do everything that they need and exercise throughout the day with that same pain? Pain is incredibly complex and can be a different experience for anybody. The goal is always to get 100% out of pain, but for some people, that's not realistic and that's not how it goes. But we still need to function throughout our day. Just some food for thought for anybody out there dealing with low back pain. There are people that can help whenever you're ready to make that change for yourself. Do me a favor. If you have any questions about low back pain, pain in general, or how to use a shop vac, drop a comment on the YouTube video or send me a text or email, and I'd be happy to hopefully provide some answers for you. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for listening. You can find ways to connect in the show notes or find me on Instagram at Higher Power Sports PT, and we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Higher Powered Podcast, presented by Higher Powered Sports PT. We hope you gained valuable insights on how to stay strong, move better, and prevent injury, all backed by expert knowledge in sports physical therapy and athletic training. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more evidence-based tips and strategies to active individuals just like you. For more resources or to connect with us, head over to hpsportspt.com. That's hpsportspt.com. Remember, you've got the power to perform at your best. Keep training smarter, recovering faster, and living stronger. Just a reminder that the content shared in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your health or treatment plan. Thanks for tuning in. We hope to see you next time on the Higher Powered Podcast.